Welcome to the Unapologetic Bibliophiles Outlander series. So this is part one of the Outlander series. I am actually going to be reviewing all of the Outlander books. So far, there are 9 of them. I'm going to be reviewing all 9 of them in a series of four episodes. That way, they're not incredibly long, but we also can kind of focus on each individual book as it goes along. So I want to talk about the Outlander series first and kind of where it came from and what it is before I get into the synopsis of the first book. So Outlander is a series of 9 books so far. Book 10 is in the works, and it is by this amazing author. Her name is Diana Gabaldon, and she is fantastic. She actually started writing Outlander in the late 1980s. And really what she was doing is she was trying to see kind of what it took to be an author and if she really liked it and wanted to go down that road. And thank heavens she did, because holy cow, Outlander is just chock full of so much, and it's a very big book, and it's just so good. Now, Outlander is my favorite series, and there's very few other series that I'm like, yes. Diana Gabaldon is one of my 2 favorite authors, so just fantastic author, and just the way she writes, it's amazing. She started writing, she first published Outlander in 1991, and the last book, Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone, just came out at the end of 2021 in November. So this has spanned quite a long time frame. It's spanned 30 years of writing, and it's not just the 9 books, but she also has a series of novels, novellas, and short stories that go along in the Outlander universe. So this is a very in-depth universe and has a very large fan base. And I don't know. It's just, I can't tell you that these are not rereadable because I have reread them several times. So I started reading Outlander. It was introduced to me end of 2014, beginning of 2015. It was right at the time Sam Heughan was announced to be Jamie, because they had just announced Starz had picked up the show. And one of my friends had said, hey, Starz just picked up this book. I've read the whole series. You need to read this. And I was like, okay, because she knew I liked historical fiction and I was looking for something. And so I said, okay. So I got the book, and it took me a while to get into it. And I actually bought the audiobook. One of the things that makes the listening of these books super enjoyable is the narrator, Davina Porter. Oh my gosh. She is not a narrator. She is a storyteller, and she is amazing. When she reads, you're kind of transported into that realm. And there's only one other narrator that I know of that was able to give me a sense of I'm in the story. And that was Jim Dale. So Davina Porter and Jim Dale are totally on the same level when it comes to, like, Davina Porter is to Outlander as Jim Dale is to Harry Potter. If Diana paints a picture with her words, Davina puts it into 4K. So it's amazing the way they work together. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to this, or just to give you a quick synopsis and reminder of what's gone on. Now, if you're a fan of the show, I will let you know that the books in the show are not exactly the same. So if you're a fan of the show, I am covering the books and not the show. So just FYI on that part. Now, before I jump into the commentary, I do want to say that that I am going to be reviewing all 9 books that are out so far of the big books. So there are going to be some spoilers. I'm going to try really hard not to give specific spoilers, just like big, broad spoilers, such as we're introduced to this character, and then you may not know if that person is alive or dead at the end of one book, but in the next book, they have a whole story arc of their own. So that's kind of the spoilers, but not very specific spoilers. These are very large books with a lot going on in them. And so I'm not going to talk about a lot of the really small specifics, just some really big important bullet points. All right. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rate these books from 1 to 9 based off of which of the series is my favorite, instead of giving them a 5-star rate, like 1 through 5 stars, because really this is my favorite series. So they all have 5 stars. So let's jump into book 1. Book 1 is called Outlander. It is the story of Jamie and Claire and kind of their love together and their life together. And throughout the series, you'll see them together as well as apart. And so in Outlander, we actually get introduced to all these characters. So we are introduced first to Claire and her husband, Frank. Now, a little bit of backstory for Claire and Frank is they were married just before World War II broke out. And so they, like, once World War II broke out, they were actually on 2 different fronts. She was a nurse on the front lines in France, and he was intelligence, I believe, in England, on the intelligence front. But after World War II ended in 1945, Claire and Frank decided that they're going to rekindle their romance. They're going to try to rediscover each other again. And they go on honeymoon in Inverness. And this is where our story picks up. So they go to Inverness, and right outside of Inverness, there's a circle of standing stones called Craignadown. One morning, Claire finds herself there by herself, and she falls through the stones, for a lack of a better term. What she does is she ends up in 1743. She doesn't know this yet, though. She's really disoriented. It doesn't look the same. She's really kind of confused. And almost immediately, she is rescued / kidnapped by the Mackenzie clan. And this is where we're introduced to Jamie. Now, the Mackenzies take Claire along with Jamie back to Castle Leoch, which is where the laird of the Mackenzie clan is. And they are there for a couple weeks, couple months, something like that. And then, but over that time frame, Jamie and Claire are becoming friends. They develop this very teasing kind of friendship. Claire has maintained that she is a widow. She basically said, look, my husband's not alive, which was true. So they all assume that she's a widow, and events happen where Claire is put in danger. And in order to save Claire's life, Jamie has to marry her. So they get married. So this is the first big spoiler, because Jamie and Claire, that they are forced into a marriage together. And then they really do develop feelings for each other, and they start to see that relationship grow. And eventually Claire chooses to tell Jamie the truth, chooses to tell Jamie when she's from, what's going on, who's doing what. One of the things that she does tell Jamie is about what's going to happen in 1745 with the Battle of Culloden. She tells him all of as much as she can. And Jamie at first doesn't believe her, but he eventually does believe her. He does take her back to Craignadown and gives her the option to go back to Frank or to stay with him. Now, I will tell you this right now. The next little bit is a little bit of a spoiler, but if this was me, I'm telling you right now, I would have chosen Frank. I am definitely Team Frank. I think he's an underrated character. I think there's a lot that's been misunderstood about Frank. However, I will say, this is why there's not going to be an epic romance story, an epic adventure story about me. I value safety and security way too much. I totally would have chosen Frank, and I would have been like, going through the stones, peace out. And that's the end of the story. Fortunately for us, Claire, spoiler, does not choose Frank, and she chooses Jamie. And so she stays with Jamie. And Jamie and Claire decide that they're going to go back to back to where he was born, back to his home. Now, I should mention here that Jamie is an outlaw. He is wanted for a crime that he did not commit, but he does have a price on his head. There is So there's a little bit of danger going back to his house. Here we are introduced to his sister Jenny, her husband Ian, and their child, and they live there for a little while. Well, after a time, like they're trying to decide, we can't stay here in Scotland. Where do we go? What do we do? They discuss their options, and through a series of unfortunate events, there's a lot in between them being at his home at Lallybroch and the end of the book, but I am not going to cover any of the stuff that happens there because it is huge spoilers, and it's not fair if you don't read it. So like you have to read that part of the book. But eventually what happens is they do end up in France in an abbey. Jamie has had a type of accident where he is needing to be healed. And so Jamie and Claire reconnect, they kind of reconnect together, healing each other. And they go to make the decision whether they're going to stay in France or, like go to Paris and go into France where the Bonnie Prince Charlie is at, or do they go to Italy and go to James's court? So this is where book one ends. So this is definitely a page turner, and I absolutely love it. When I rate these books, the first book of Outlander, I think, is probably right in the middle for the first book. And so this one is like 5, like this one from 1 to 9 out of my favorites. This is right in the middle. It's 5. But again, this is the favorites of my favorites. So we're going to now get into book 2 of the series. So book 2 is called Dragonfly and Amber. And this book actually starts out in a way that you don't expect. So you start out and you really sit there and go, wait a minute. Did I get this? Did I miss something? Am I reading the right book? What's going on here? Just know that you're going to think that when you do read the book. But we do eventually end up back with Jamie and Claire in France. And so they have decided that they are going to stay in France, go to Paris, and see if they can maybe subvert the Bonnie Prince's modes of gaining money or influence in France, with the hopes that it will stop him from then invading Scotland and then England. So Jamie gets a job with his cousin Jared, and he's able to kind of rub elbows with the Parisian nobility and people who are kind of higher up and in charge of money. And we are introduced at this time to the Bonnie Prince, and Jamie and the Bonnie Prince have a kind of friendship. Now, Jamie is doing a little bit more spying and a little bit more nefarious things than what the Bonnie Prince thinks. The Bonnie Prince really does believe that Jamie is a very good friend and a supporter of the Bonnie Prince, even though in reality, Jamie is trying to figure out what's going on and what's the likelihood that he's going to get what he's asking from the French king, as well as anybody else that's willing to support his father's claim to the Scottish throne. Now, in this whole process, we get introduced to this little pickpocket and his little 10-year-old Claudel, who Jamie rechristens Fergus, and then basically adopts. Fergus is an orphan in France, and Jamie's like, cool, you can be my employee, but then he becomes more than employee and like a son. And Fergus, we do see him in the rest of the books, which is why I introduce you to him now. So there's a lot that goes on in France. Very good read. There are friendships, alliances, and enemies that are made while they're in France. However, unfortunately, Jamie does make a couple very bad decisions, and I personally can't blame him, but he does make some very bad decisions, which does end up getting him exiled from France. But it also gets him a pardon back in Scotland and England. So Jamie and Claire decide that they're going to go home to Scotland, because he can now go and be on his land and be the laird that he was supposed to be. Well, they go back to Scotland, and Jamie and Claire are like, okay, fine. This is wonderful. We tried. Now we're going to stay out of it. Unfortunately, the friendship that he had with the Bonnie Prince kind of comes back to bite him in the butt. And the Bonnie Prince names Jamie as a friend and ally. And so Jamie is kind of forced to enter into the fight and into the fray. Now, the next section of the book follows battles in different, the battles of the Scottish Rebellion of 45. I will actually be posting a history video that it talks about the leading up to the battle of 45 and the rebellion of 45. And we follow this with Jamie and Claire. And so if you want to know a little bit more about the histories, I will put a link to that video in the description below when as soon as it is published. And so it is there's just so much that goes on at this point. We get eventually to just before to the eve of the Battle of Culloden, and they know at this point it's a lost cause. They know at this point that history is not going to change. It's not going to be fixed. The battle will still happen. And so they make some contingencies. Jamie signs his land over to his nephew, but dates it for like a year beforehand. He sends his men, as well as Fergus, back to Lallybroch in order to save them from being on the battlefield at Culloden, and hopefully save them from what Claire does tell them about Cumberland's men coming through and decimating the Highlands and the clans. And Jamie then takes Claire to the Circle of Standing Stones, and he sends her back to Frank. Jamie does reveal that he is aware that she is pregnant and says, you have to do this for the babe. You have to do this for me, because I'm going to go die. And he basically pushes her back through the stones, and then has all intentions of returning to Culloden, and they're dying on the battlefield. Claire then does go through the stones, and she ends up back in 1948. Now, this is 3 years after she left. She spent 3 years in the past. She's 3 years on now, and they call Frank and they say, hey, we found your wife. And Frank comes back, and Frank takes her back. He knows that she's pregnant. He knows that she's been with somebody else. And eventually he starts to, like, at this point in time, he doesn't really accept that she went to the past, because she does tell him. But he basically is like, look, I'm here. I'm going to take care of you. You know, if I'm all you have, then I'm going to be here to take care of you. And he then she agrees, and she agrees to leave Jamie in Scotland while she goes with Frank to Boston, where Frank has been offered a job teaching at Harvard. So this is where we end book 2. So Dragonfly and Amber, the first time I read the book, there's things that happen in France that at the time that I was originally reading this book, I was going through stuff in my own family and in my own personal life that I could not continue to read the book. I had to put it down because it was just too emotional for me. But I was overly emotional at that point in time when I was trying to read the book. So I actually didn't even get out of France before I put the book down the first time I read it. So it was like a year later when I was able to re-pick it back up, and I read Outlander and then read Dragonfly and Amber, and I made it all the way through, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. The thing with this book, though, is it has a lot more, it has more closure in it than the other books. And fortunately, Diana continued to write. Thank you so much. And we do have more books that go along with this, but this book really does feel a little bit more like a finite ending. when it's really just the close of a chapter of love, friendship, and moving on to the struggles of being apart. And so if I was to rate this book, because of certain things and certain associations I make with it, this book is actually my least favorite out of all of the books. Again, it's still a very good book. It's still very well written, and it's still amazing to read. But out of the 9 books, this is my least favorite. So this is number 9 for me. It gets easier to read as I reread them. So thank you so much for watching. If you did like this review video, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button so you can get to the rest of my videos and you can know when we post more videos and post more reviews. And so stick around. Part 2 is going to be coming up. I'm going to be reviewing books 3, 4, and 5. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.